Please recite with me.
The work of this fellowship, which is weaving a tapestry of love, we call community. We dedicate ourselves, and these are offerings.
This time of year, most folks are just getting over the Christmas season, but this is my Advent. The birth of Jesus, we have this enormous celebration. And to be sure, he offers a great wealth of wisdom and guidance in the recorded teachings. But institutional Christianity turned him into a personal Messiah. A me and you God kind of thing. And that's really not supported in Scripture. The notion of a personal relationship would be inconceivable to the Jews of his day. But Messiah means simply this: anointed one. And there are, in the ancient scriptures, kings and leaders who were not even Jews, who were identified by the Jews as Messiah. So that word is not off limits when I talk about Jesus. But as I said, this is for me the Advent season. I have honored the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King since before it was a holiday. I always took that day off. That to me was the Messiah of my generation. Not a godlike figure, but a source of enormous wisdom, strength, courage. Of course, Martin Luther King is the one that we identify with the entirety of the movement, and he was anything but the entirety of the movement. He was quick to say, it's not me, it's these thousands of feet on the ground. But dead men make such good heroes. We can strip them of the challenge and make them an icon to the progress we have made. I would, though, like to remember those who came before. A few years ago, I learned about a group of 10 men who walked into the public library in Alexandria, Virginia, my hometown. In 1940, black men walked into the public library and demanded a library card. Of course, they were refused. But they would not leave. They were arrested. Nobody's heard of these guys. I wouldn't even know their names if I hadn't had the opportunity to buy a postcard at the museum in Alexandria. But their act led to the creation of a separate black library in Alexandria. Until then, there was no public library. They were convicted, sentenced, served their time in jail, and utterly forgotten. And yet that act led to the next, and the next, and then the next. So that by the time I was old enough to choose where I would go for lunch or for shopping in Alexandria, there were no whites-only places. These were the first Robins of Alexandria. I love Haywood Brown's story. There is so much. But It's not a story of martyrdom. Yeah, the bird dies, but that's incidental to the story. That's just why we know the story. Perhaps he set off knowing that his journey would end in his death, and yet that had nothing to do with his motivation. Nor is it a Don Quixote story. This is not a delusional bird. This is not one who sets out to be some divine figure of victory or of death. This is simply a creature who insists on living his truth no matter the outcome. And there have always been these. And we. Because I am so bold as to include you and me in this number. Go unnoticed. Few who are not our descendants will even know our name in the next century. And that is not why we do what we do. Whatever it is that we do, for some of us, yes, it is the struggle to transform larger society in some way, to alleviate poverty, to make education accessible, to end the death penalty and reform the criminal justice system, to increase the freedom of religious expression in this country. For some of us, it is that. But for some of us, it is not that. It may be teaching in a classroom or just around a bridge table. It may be the conversations at the coffee house and the grocery store. It may be just struggling to make sure that the children grow up strong and independent. But whatever our struggle, there is that time in our life. For some of us, there are many such times. But for all of us, there will be at least one, that time when we realize that our richest aspirations, our true desires, will not be achieved in our lifetime. Now, for those of us who have been engaged in these struggles for justice, that is a familiar lesson. But for many of us, those lessons don't come as often, and when they do, they can be devastating to realize perhaps my child will not graduate from college before I go. Perhaps this school will not be a safe place for gay children before I go. Perhaps Montgomery, Alabama will not be a safe place for a diversity of religious expression before I go. Any of these things, whatever it is that drives our energy and our life, if it is truly worthy of our dedication, it will not occur in our lifetime. We will reach milestones. We will have occasions for celebration, but truly what we work for will not occur in our lifetime, no matter what it is. So why bother? We are familiar with the experience of burnout for teachers and ministers and activists of various types, but it is easy for that same experience of disappointment, bordering on despair, to creep into all the areas of our life. Why bother? And it has to be a decision, because truly, sometimes the reason will not be apparent. As we see legislation that seems to undo what we have done, as we see our children make terrible mistakes that we know they knew better, as we see neighbor turn against neighbor, there will be profound disappointments in life. And so it becomes necessary to simply say, because it matters. It's a religious decision. It's a religious decision because we can't place it into a syllogism, an equation, a logical argument. It matters because it matters. And it is how I choose to live my life. When I refuse to shop at Walmart because I do not wish to participate in the oppression that is perpetrated, I do not think that my absence will matter to them. It is extremely important to me that I will not shop at Walmart, and yet I know that beyond this space, it doesn't matter. But it matters to me because it matters, because it is a core value of my life that I personally am pledged insofar as it is possible that I will not benefit from deliberate oppression of vulnerable others. I will not take that 50 cents out of a laborer's pocket just because it's there. Perhaps there are similar decisions you make in your own life that sometimes you wonder, why bother? Why bother carrying those canvas grocery bags into the store? I mean, it doesn't make any difference. In one sense, yes, it doesn't make any difference in a mathematical equation. But in another sense, it is the difference. These tiny actions, these unnoticed, inconspicuous ways that we walk through our lives express the core of who we are and reinforce our own faith and optimism in the possibility for humanity. It matters just because it matters. Now, Brian Stevenson was quoted recently in a New York Times article as saying that when we despair, we become a tool of oppression. In the political arena, there is no question that this is true. I mean, look at the voter turnout. I think we set a record this year. Why bother, the kids say? It won't make a difference. And truly, one more person at the poll doesn't make a difference. But what happens when we say and act on that attitude of despair? Resignation has become a theme in our political activity. Why bother? When we act on this, we get what we got. And it truly only takes one person to influence another. So what can one person do is influence another. There is absolutely no way to get 100,000 people to the polls. All we can do is one. And it is by doing one that we get 100,000 people to the polls. You know, before Martin Luther King came to serve Dexter Avenue, Vernon Johns made a lot of noise, got himself in a lot of trouble, got run out of town. He's a controversial figure, and he's not all good news, but this was a man who just would not accept resignation. A first robin. And here we are, 50 years later, in the same town. A town that is saturated in political and social resignation. Desperate to get 100,000 people to the polls. And the only way we can do that is by getting one person. Those conversations. Sure, you write a letter to the editor, maybe. Maybe that's your thing, but maybe it's not. Conversation is how we transform society. Without exception. Look back. How is it that we made this impossible leap from homosexuality being a taboo subject that was never mentioned in public media to legal marriage in much of this country? Conversation. We talked to each other. We took this private experience, which has always existed within our individual families, and took it into the workplace and the houses of worship and the grocery store and the coffee shop, and we said, now wait a minute, that's not true. This, instead, is the reality I experience. Those conversations, dialogue, engagement with one another, that is how we change the world. And trust me, it will not happen in your lifetime. But you know what? Here's my favorite thing about that. There is actually good news in knowing that I cannot possibly achieve what I dream of in my lifetime. I can't fail. No action, no energy, no moment of time expended in the interest of transforming society and communicating love and compassion among our fellow human beings is ever wasted or failure. Because the victories take centuries of progression. And what we are is a moment in those centuries towards our next victory. And history may remember only a time in the future, but we cannot be spared. And I wouldn't be if I could. Because it's a two-part endeavor. On the one hand, I know that moral arc of history that bends towards justice does so only because we participate in it. But on the other hand, I know that the only life I can be sure to impact, the only actions I can ever control are my own. And so I have the option of living and dying in resignation and despair. But I choose instead to live and one day to die in the conviction that there is possibility, that history speaks to us of unbreakable progress, and that every act affirming the worth and dignity of human life is worthwhile. There may not be any good news today. Our job is to make some. And that's what makes our individual lives worthwhile as well. Join me now, if you will, follow in the singing of number 348, Guide My